graciously dedicated by Dina Dornbush, thanking the Rebbe for showing us the way back home with the help of his dedicated and inspiring shluchim. Thank you very much. Also dedicated to Aaron Ben Sarah for a refuah shlema and a refuah krova, a complete and speedy recovery. We should be able to have him back at our men's classes, not just virtually. At the end of Parshas Balak, this week's portion, there is a very enigmatic and disturbing and intriguing and mysterious story. After Balak fails with his attempt to have Balaam curse the Jewish people, all the curses are transformed into blessings. And at this moment there is so much positivity in the air. Even the great enemy of the Jewish people, Balak, and the great enemy of the Jewish people, Balaam, all that could come out of his mouth are some of the most beautiful, poetic praises in the most eloquent fashion on the virtues, the greatness of the past, present, and future of the Jewish people, all the way to Achris Hayamim. In fact, most of the prophecies on Mashiach come from the mouth of Balaam in Parshas Balak. And right after that, chapter 25 of the book of Numbers, Bamidbar Perek Chafei, which is the end of Balak, and you see it here, the Torah shifts to a very disturbing story. Vayeshev Yisrael b'shittim, vayachelam liznos el b'nos mayav. The Jewish people settled in a place called Shittim. This is in the Transjordan, the eastern side of the Jordan River. And the people begin to commit adultery with the women, with the daughters of the Moabite nation. Balak couldn't destroy them. Balaam couldn't destroy them. But people can destroy themselves. They invited the people. The daughters of Moab invited the people, the Jewish people, to the sacrifices of their gods. The sacrifices of the pagan gods were often very grotesque, promiscuous, immoral. And the people eat, and they prostrate themselves to their gods. Vayitzamed Yisrael Bal Peor. Israel, the Jewish people, become addicted. They become chained, attached, connected to Bal Peor. Bal Peor is the name of a pagan idolatry, a form of idol worship in the ancient world. So even though it says they were involved in sacrifices of their gods and they ate and they prostrated themselves, but there's one particular deity that the Torah points out that not only did they become vayitzamed, they became tzamud. You know what a tzamid is? A bracelet. Huh? Right, yeah. When you say tzamud, it means you're attached, you're connected. I join up with something. So you say vayitzamed Yisrael, they didn't only become involved, they became completely engaged and attached, like addicted to the Bal Peor, vayicher af Hashem b'Yisrael. And Hashem's pain, anger was ignited in Yisrael. What is this Bal Peor? What is this interesting name for a deity? What is Bal Peor? So Rashi gives us the commentary, as he always does. And it's not for the faint of heart. It's quite a strange deity. You'll forgive me, but I'm just quoting the words of Rashi. So Rashi says, Peor, al-shem. The word Peor actually means when someone is beer, when something is removed from all coverings. So it's called Peor. So he says, al-shem shepoyerin lefonav pia tabas umoitziin re'i v'zui avaydasa. The reason it's named so is because in front of these idols, people would remove all their garments. They would be bare. And they would bare their private parts before it and relieve themselves. They would defecate, they would move their bowels in front of this idol, on top of this idol. V'zui avaydasa. This was how it was worshipped. Quite an interesting way of worshiping your God. You got to go to the bathroom. This is the right place. You do it on God, on your God. This is what Rashi says. I apologized before. This is what it was. So I can understand different types of worship that people get addicted to, they get involved in. There's some high, there's some maybe numbing force or calming force or distraction. What one would wonder, what exactly, first of all, who came up with this idea that this is how you worship your deity? Somebody had to come up with this interesting idea. And it so attracted the Jewish people. What is so interesting about the Bal Peor is, it's not just mentioned here in Parshas Balak. It's the one idolatry that is mentioned most in the Torah. There's other mentioned. You have the Asherah, you have the Baal. Throughout the Torah, you have mentioned different avodah zaras, different idolatries that are mentioned. But 4 times in Dvarim, 5 times in Bamidbar. In Bamidbar itself, Sefer Bamidbar, the Bal Peor is mentioned 5 times. 4 times it's going to be in Dvarim. And numerous times in the books of the prophets, in the books of the writings, in the Nevi'im and in the Ksuvim. Somehow, this idolatry had some yichus, some prominence, to the point that the Torah really deals with it. Not only that, as we move on in Chumash to Sefer Dvarim, just in a few weeks, we're now in the 40th year in the desert, Moshe is soon going to pass away. And Eila Hadvarim, the last book, begins Moshe's final will and testament, Moshe's final presentation to the Jewish people during the last 5 weeks of his life. It begins, Eila Hadvarim Asher Diber Moshe, these are the words that Moshe spoke, and this continues till the end of the Torah, till his passing. If you take a look at your next source, Dvarim Perek Gimel Pasuk Chavtes, Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the Jewish people and he says, Vaneshav Bagoy, we dwelled in the valley Mul Beis Peor, parallel to this home of Peor, to the home of this idol called Peor. And he says, and this is where his presentation is, this is where his final speech is, this is like the landmark, Mul Beis Peor. And then a few psukim later, Dvarim, this is Dvarim Gimel, Dvarim Daled, chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, verse 45, he says, Eila Eides Vachukim Vamishpatim Asher Diber Moshe al Bnei Yisrael B'Tzesim HaMitzrayim. Here are all the laws that Moshe gave the Jews, spoke to the Jews leaving after they left Egypt. Be'ever Ayarden, on the Trans-Jordan, on the other side of the Jordan, meaning on the eastern side of the Jordan. Bagai in the valley, Mul Beis Peor, parallel to the home of the Peor. Be'eretz Sich, in the land of Sichon, Melech HaAmori, who was the king of the Amorites, Asher Yosef B'Cheshbon, who lived in a city called Cheshbon, Asher Hika Moshe B'nei Yisrael B'Tzesim HaMitzrayim, which Moshe and the Jewish people struck when they left Egypt, because Sichon came to war against them. So imagine Moshe's final presentation to the Jewish people, the whole Sefer Dvarim. The Torah gives a landmark. You know where it was? It was all Mul Beis Peor. If that's not enough, we come to the passing of Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet who ever lived, the first chosen leader of the Jewish people, to liberate us, to mold us into a nation, to give us the Torah, to lead us all the way to the promised land. And the end of the Dvarim, the end of his Eis HaBracha, the end of the whole Torah. Dvarim Lamed Daled, this is the 34th chapter of Dvarim. Vayamas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem Be'eretz Moav Al Pi Hashem. Moshe passed away. Moshe, the servant of Hashem, passed away there. Where? In the land of Moav, by the mouth of God. Vayikber Oisei, and he buried him. Where did Moshe get buried? Be'eretz Moav, in the land of Moav. That's in the area of Petra today, Jordan, on the eastern side of the Jordan. Where? Mul Beis Peor. You want to know where Moshe's burial place is? Parallel to Beis Peor. Nobody knows where he's buried exactly, even though the Torah gives all these landmarks. It's in the land of Moav. It's Mul Beis Peor. That's true. But we still don't know exactly where Moshe's burial place is. And one wonders, what's this great yichus of Bal Peor? Keeps on coming up again and again and again. Not only did the Jews become addicted to it, but when Moshe gives his final talk to the Jewish people to inspire them forever, this is the talk that will become Sefer Dvarim, the final words of Moshe to empower the Jews throughout their long history till the coming of Mashiach. And even afterwards, the landmark is we're sitting close to the Beis Peor, and that's where his burial is as well. Let's see a story that the Gemara tells about this quite enigmatic and intriguing and strange and bizarre and seemingly grotesque idolatry. So your next source is Sanhedrin, Samach Daled Amud Aleph. This is Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin, page 64a. Tanu Rabbanan, again, forgive me for this story. I did not make up the story. I would have not came up with this story. This is a story that the Gemara Talmud written around 1700 years ago to try to teach the Jewish people about what was going on. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught. Maisa, you have it also in the English right afterwards. We have an English translation as well. Maisa besafta ben elas shehiskir chamoire legoya achas. Okay, actually, the English translation is from a story nearby. There's a few stories on that page. So let's first do the Hebrew, then we'll do the other story. There's two stories here. This is a story about a man named Safta. His father's name was Elos, Safta ben Elos. He rented out his donkey to a Goya Achas, to one Gentile woman. She needed to travel somewhere. This was the taxi of the time, the Uber, the Lyft of the time. He needed transportation. So he rented his donkey. He would ride it, and he would give her a lift. That's how people did it. She would pay him money, and he would transport her wherever she had to go. Kivan she'igia lePeor. They're traveling, and they pass by the ashram, or the monastery, or the home with this Peor idol. Amra, she's a pagan religious Gentile, so she tells to him, Hamtin adshe kanes veitze. In Uber, you can make a stop. You make a stop. It's not your final destination. So she says, we got to stop. I'll pay you some extra money. Wait. I'm going to go in, do my thing, worship the God here. And then I'll come out. We'll continue the journey. La'acher sheyatza. She came out. Omar lo, he says, you know what? Af atam tini adshe kanes veitze. You know what? I'll also seize the opportunity to go in and come back out. I'll also do it. He was a curious Jew. Amar Allah, she said, V'lo Yehudiyata. Aren't you Jewish? Jews don't worship this way. Amar Allah, he says to her, Ma'ich beslach. What do you care? What are you mixing in? What do you care? So I'm Jewish. Why does it bother you if I'm going to show homage and honor to your God? You should be happy. Nichnas, he went in. Par befonov. He moved his bowels in front of the deity. V'kinech b'chait mai. And then, you'll forgive me, he needed to clean himself. So he used the nose of this deity to wipe himself. He felt very good about himself because he really embarrassed this deity. V'hayu kaimrin, the priests, mekalsin, they were praising. They said, "My olam lo haya adam shavadei lo zabekach." There was never a person who worshipped so skillfully this God. He did it right. Finally, we had to learn from the Jews. When the Jew out-Gentiles the Gentile, it's much. When the Jew is like the Gentile, he's better than the Gentile. He does it perfectly. He does it with Jewish precision. He did it right. Nobody ever did it as well as this guy. You see here another story, also in the same Gemara in Sanhedrin, a different style. There was a Gentile woman who was ill, and she vowed if she recovers from her illness, she's going to go and worship every idol in the world, because you don't know who saved you. So she recovered, and she went to worship every idol in the world, and she comes to the Peor, she asked the priests, how do you do this? So they said, you eat greens, you drink beer, and then one defecates before the idol. She said, I'd rather that I get sick again than do this, or put it differently, this is going to make me more sick than my original illness. So that was her reference. All this just points out how bizarre and strange this idol was, to the point that here's a Jew who presumably, wanted to embarrass it and denigrate it and humiliate it. And nonetheless, it turns out that they praised him that nobody ever did it as well as him. In fact, I just want to see, I'm just going to get a chumash. In fact, there's an amazing commentary from the Vilna Gaon in Parshas V'eschanan. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people they shouldn't add onto any mitzvahs and they shouldn't diminish from any mitzvahs. And he says first, don't add, and then don't subtract. Lo yisifu, lo yisigru. And he says, you see right afterwards, Einechem haroyos asher asa Hashem b'Bal Peor. You see what God did to the Bal Peor and to those who were involved in it. What's the connection? So the Vilna Gaon says, Gavaldik, that some Jews thought we want to add onto the mitzvahs. How? Go and embarrass and defecate and denigrate and humiliate the idol. What's a greater way to add to your enthusiasm for Yiddishkeit? It turns out that this was the man who was considered to be the greatest worshipper of the Bal Peor. So the Torah says, Lo yisoigru, don't diminish. Lo yisifu, also don't add anything. Sometimes you think I'm going to add and I'm going to beautify and I'm going to make it better than the original. It's like they tell a joke about a Jew who translated Romeo and Juliet into Yiddish. This was a Jew in Warsaw before the Second World War. So he translated Shakespeare's play into Yiddish. So they say that he wrote on the title page, Romeo and Juliet von William Shakespeare, übergesetzt und verbessert durch Yankel Rosenberg. Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, translated and enhanced by Yankel Rosenberg. So if there's a Rosenberg here, it's your sixth cousin, don't worry. Right? So lo yisifu. There's no need for enhancements. But we want to now get to the crux. What was this Bal Peor about? It becomes so dominant, besides everything else I mentioned. If you take a look, Yehoshua Perek Chav Beis, this is already a generation later. This is Yehoshua chapter 22. He says, Hama'at lanu es avoin Peor asher lo yitarnu mimenu ad hayom hazeh. Have we not suffered enough from this idolatry, Bal Peor, from which we have not cleansed ourselves from it till this very day? And I want to ask you, how hard is it to stay away from Bal Peor? I know different temptations people have in lives, but come on. The contrast is also so stark. It's so dramatic in Parshas Balak. Most of the parsha, till we get to chapter 25, is the glory of the Jewish people. Like Bilam himself, one of the greatest anti-Semites who ever lived, he can't get enough of praising the Jewish people. Like, I'm trying to find the negativity, the evil, the darkness, and the guy can't help himself. Matoivu, even words that we say every morning, Matoivu, we open up our davening with a line from Bilam. Matoivu ayalecha Yaakov, Mishkeneisecha Yisrael, how good are your tents, Jacob, your dwelling places, Yisrael. What lines like Hein am kilavi yakum v'chari yisnasa, a nation that rises and it has the resilience and strength of a lion. Or leihibit avim b'Yaakov v'leiramel b'Yisrael Hashem alakavi ma'Yisrael melech boy. I'm just giving examples of a few of his phrases. He hasn't seen iniquity in Yaakov because God is with him and the king is best friends with them. I mean, all of these expressions. And then at the end, they become addicted to this Bal Peor, which is not only unintelligent, but seems bizarre from any level, on any level, any perspective. There's one very, it's a humorous, but it's also a sincere explanation. It comes from the Kotzker Rebbe, I believe. It's Siach Sarfi Kodesh. That I'm just saying as an intro, and then I want to get into the crux of the class, the meat of the class. And he says that it came about in a very interesting way. And that is, sometimes, if a person is engrossed in a very, very transcendent experience, they may not notice what happens to their body. So he says the way it started off was that people reached very deep states of transcendental meditation to the point that they weren't noticing what was going on with their bodies. So even if their bodies had to attend to its needs, it was almost like inadvertent, because they were completely in a spiritual trance, metaphysical trance. He says the new generation, the children, didn't realize what's happening. So they thought that became the way of worshiping the idol. And of course, this is a commentary on things that happen in cultures where things may begin in one way, but then people, especially a younger generation, doesn't realize what the intent was, and they basically take the lowest part of it, and that becomes the main thing. And different things in different cultures, including in our own, where sometimes things happen, as a product of a more sincere and deep attachment, but then people don't know how to distinguish anymore between this and this. Today I want to present two interpretations to the deeper meaning of Bal Peor. One comes from a sefer called Tzemach Hashem L'Tzvi. Tzemach Hashem L'Tzvi is a Hasidic work that was written by a man named Reb Tzvi Hirsch of Nadvorna. He was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich, of course, was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. The Maggid of Mezrich, Rabbeinu Dober, was his student, and the Tzemach Hashem L'Tzvi, that's the name of his work, Reb Tzvi of Nadvorna, was his student. He was born in Tov Kuf. He was born 1740, and he passed away 1802. He says a very, very powerful insight. That's one insight that we're going to share. What do you ask? The Tzvi of Radvarna was a student, a chassid of the Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich. He was born 1740, Tovkuf, and he passed away Tovkuf Samach Beis, 1802. The Maggid passed away in the 1772. But he passed away a few decades later because he was a student. The second interpretation comes from another student of the Maggid of Mezrich, known as the Baal HaTanya, the author of the Tanya and the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was born 5 years later, 1745, and passed away 1812. We'll soon see how the two interpretations connect and converge, but they both discuss the deeper meaning of Bal Peor. I'll first share the commentary of the Baal HaTanya. This is in his book Likutei Torah, Parshas V'Schanan, and then we'll get to the Tzemach Hashem L'Tzvi. And he says, even though at the surface it seems like a pretty grotesque, repulsive, and disgusting way of worship, and that's certainly true, to the point that this woman would rather become ill, go back to her illness than do it. But there is, like in everything, there was a perspective here. A filthy perspective, an idolatrous perspective, but a perspective nonetheless. What was the perspective? They worshipped that which most people reject and don't want to look at. The refuse, the excrement, the dirt that the body evacuates. This is not something one exposes. This is something that we call a Beis HaKavod, a house of glory, which means it's a house of respect. In Hebrew it's called a Bet Shemush. But the point is a place where people are private. And here not only was it not private, it was glorified. This is what you give to the deity. This is the climax. This is the apex. This is your God. What everyone else rejects, what the body rejects and evacuates, this is what we adore. This is actually what we do in front of our God. This is how we worship our God. Can you see a philosophy here? The Shmutz Vert Heilig. What is considered dirty and filthy in one culture or in one environment or from one perspective is actually divine. It's sacred. It's hallowed and it's holy. I'm not going to be embarrassed. On the contrary, this is what I do in front of my God. I don't close my eyes. I don't pray. I don't sing. I don't dance. I don't burn incense. I don't prostrate myself. I don't pour wine or sacrifice, which is what they used to do. Sometimes sacrifice people too in these pagan idols. But this is exactly what I do. As Rashi says, I defecate. What is this about? So the Baal HaTanya explains, for this we have to understand how the digestive process works. And we all know this. The digestive system of the human being is one of the most miraculous, incredible systems that exist on our planet, both for humans, but of course for all living organisms that digest food. I mean, it's an incredible process of how the body knows how to take food, break it apart, it becomes disintegrated. The body has a PhD the moment you're born. What's good for the blood, what's not good for the blood, what's good for which part of the blood, how to carry the right nutrients and oxygen to every single cell of the human body. And digestion begins, by the way, the moment we put the food into our mouth, already on the tongue. The saliva of the tongue already begins the process of digestion. It's very interesting. Already the saliva on the tongue starts the process. It doesn't only start later. And as we digest it, as the food travels down the esophagus, the food pipe, that's called the veshet, and everything gets broken down, the body identifies what's useful, what's useless, and useful itself. There's the sugar, there's the fat, and then there's the part which gets stored in its place, and that's why some of us have a little extra fat, just for a time of need. And then, of course, the part that can get converted completely into the bloodstream. And then the body decides there's certain aspects of the food, I can't do anything with it. So it's time to say goodbye, and the body evacuates it. It's so interesting. I saw this in one of the works by Rabbi Avigdor Miller. He writes, all of the elements of digestion happen involuntarily. I don't know what, most of us don't even know what's happening, right? It's going to be happening when we're asleep, when we're doing other things. We don't know that we eat. Hopefully we're eating the better foods. And then the body does everything on its own. It doesn't ask you, it doesn't need your consent. This is part of the inner miraculous mechanisms of the body that we talk about in the bracha after the bath. Adam bechachma. There's a divine wisdom in every cell and system of the body. Etc. There's only one part of the digestive system that the body stops and waits for the person to decide when, where, and exactly how to do it. And that is this process, the process of evacuation. And here you see how God honors the human being. Till that process, everything happens without my consent. If the last process would happen without my consent, we all know what the consequences of that would be. So here, the human being has mastery. It's very fascinating. So now the body decides this has to be rejected because there's no use. But we all know that's not the end of the process. That's the end of the process from our body's perspective. The nutrition continues. The further excrement of most mammals becomes the best fertilizer that fertilizes the soil. And in fact, until the modern world, when we started to build all the bathrooms, etc., this was true also with human beings, as is true with all the mammals, that this continues. So it may not work for the body, but there's a lower level of life that gets nutrition from that which my body can't get nutrition from. And if you ever studied the interesting life of a dung beetle, you ever read about dung beetles? Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about dung beetles. And I don't mean to freak anybody out. You could check this up on National Geographic. So those of you who still use Encyclopedia Britannica, alav shalom. You remember that? A relic, yeah. You could check this up. But it's fascinating. Dung beetles are these little tiny beetles, and they eat dung. That's why they're called dung beetles. So it's quite interesting how Hashem makes this world. They find what they call a treasure, what we would call pretty disgusting, but for them it's a treasure, right? But how are they supposed to deal with it? They need to store it away for the winter, so they have food for a whole winter. So they make it into round cakes, and then with their bodies they roll it, literally like a ball, like a baseball, like a little mountain. They literally, mamish like a bull, they roll it until they come to their storage place where they bury it and they have food for the whole winter. And sometimes you see these dung beetles getting into wars with each other. You have these documentaries, they're getting into war. What are they fighting about? They're fighting about this little ball of excrement, of dung. So the body says, this is garbage. The dung says, this is not garbage. This is my lifeline. The body says, no, this is refuse. I don't need it. The earth says, no, this is going to fertilize me. In fact, one of the earliest Nobel Prizes was given to a Jew, a German Jew, a chemist by the name of Haber. Ever heard of him? Because in the early 1900s, he developed, together with a friend, synthetic fertilizer. At that time, the human population was growing. He lived in Germany. Germany was hungry because they didn't have enough fertilizer to be able to produce all the produce and vegetation they needed to feed the world. So he figured out how to manipulate nitrogen in order to create synthetic fertilization, which is basically, bread from the ear. Bread from the ear. And it literally changed the world. I think his name was Franz Haber. And today they credit this, he won the Nobel Prize, they credit him with probably the survival of maybe a third of civilization, a third of humanity, a few billion people because of this unique invention. There's also another dark side to his life, but that's not for today. It's a very tragic story with Mr. Haber, Dr. Haber. But in any case, so this is the process of digestion. This whole process doesn't begin here on earth. The process begins, like everything in the spiritual worlds. Everything in the world comes from divine energy. Everything. Everything. Va'ata mechaya eskulam, we say in the morning. Everything is Hashem's energy. And the energy of everything comes from the source of all the energy, which is Hashem, who is also the source of all life and all love and all goodness and all tainug, all delight and all bliss. And the will of Hashem that something should exist, that will translates into energy. That will is an energy. And that's why in everything there is pleasure. In everything in the world, there's the pleasure one can find in so many different things in the world and endless things in the world, because ultimately everything comes from the source of all pleasure. But like the digestive system, it depends which level in the chain I'm tuning in to the food. Just like I could take a piece of food which is absolutely nutritious and healthy. I take this food and my body welcomes it. You know when you eat something and you feel good after you ate it. Everybody knows the difference. I can eat something and 5 minutes later I feel like a piece of garbage because I ate garbage. I put garbage into me, so now I feel like the garbage because we are what we eat. Sometimes you eat something that's truly suitable for the body celebrates it. It almost like thanks you. Oh, I feel good. There's energy here. There's a bliss here. Even that which the body cannot digest, the body now evacuates, but there's another creature, maybe the dung beetle, who celebrates it. So this is exactly how the divine energy evolves, literally like a digestive system. On every level of reality, there is the food that can get absorbed into the system, and there's the food that has to be passed on, and it can only be absorbed on a much lower level of consciousness. If you would give a person the diet of the dung beetle, nobody would be able to live. But for the dung beetle, it works. So it always depends where you are in the chain of existence. Those worlds and souls and creatures that are more sensitive, so in order for them to experience their life force, they have a more open, a more revealed form of divine energy, which they then absorb. As the chain of existence evolves or devolves, so now the energy, which in one world was nutritious, some of that energy, it's called psilus. What's psilus? It's evacuated, it's rejected. It goes into another world and it feeds that world. For the higher world, it's like my body can't do anything with this. This is not going to do well for me. For me to keep this in the body, to keep the excrement in the body is counterproductive. It's a hazard for health. At some point, the body has to get rid of it. You can't wait too long. If chas v'shalom we wait too long, it's very dangerous. But for the other creatures, they celebrate this. Because on a different state of consciousness, what is dirt or excrement on one level becomes nutritious on another level. And we all know this in people's lives, right? It's even true with food. Some people are very, very sensitive. What other people enjoy, they look at it and they're like, I'm going to vomit. Just looking at it, I'm going to vomit. Other people, I don't know, they can eat a whole bag of potato chips and they move on. And other people, they're already after 3 pieces, they're already in a bad mood. So it has to do with sensitivity. I once read there was a couple that they got into healthy eating. They went to this nutritionist and he gave them this beautiful diet. After a month of sticking to it, they decided to celebrate in the old way. So they went to a restaurant and they ate all the good old, horrible foods. They came home and they couldn't sleep a whole night because of stomach aches. So in the morning, the guy called the nutritionist. He says, we got into your diet and now we ate the same foods we used to eat and we're both sick. He says, well, after a month of healthy eating, your body at least is protesting. In the past, it didn't protest. Now at least you're sensitive enough to protest. So it's always about where a person is, what I can absorb, what I can't absorb. There's certain conversations that certain people, it works for them. And other people, when they're more sensitive, they feel the toxicity of it. I can't be part of this. Why? Because they're just more in tune with energy. They just need a deeper, more real form of energy. Right? There's different frequencies we can live on. Every person we live, there's different vibrations in life we can tune into. There's the vibration of love. There's the vibration of empathy. There's the vibration of compassion. The vibration of bliss. There's the vibration of guilt, shame. It's also a vibration. There's also a music there, but it's a very low, it's a very small, it's a very tiny frequency. Which frequency am I in? Am I into the frequency of fear, of guilt, of shame, of desperation, of resentment? These are all frequencies, but they're very, very tiny. They're very narrow, very small frequencies. So the Baal HaTanya says Hashem's energy evolves. In the higher world, you have very powerful energy. That energy is absorbed, and that becomes the state of consciousness of that reality. How do you create a lower world, which has a completely different perception of reality? And the answer is the evacuation of the system, the psilus of the higher world, which means the spiritual refuse. Is that the word, refuse? The spiritual refuse of the higher world becomes the nutrition of the lower world. And then it goes lower and lower and lower and lower, until we have the bliss and the pleasure in our world, which can often be from things that are completely detached from their source of life. In our world, we have a concept where a person could fall in love or have a crush or become obsessed with mundane realities that are really empty and devoid. In fact, I can constantly distract myself with things that seem pleasurable, but they're devoid of real, divine, meaningful content. How does that happen? That's what the psilus is. That's what the refuse is. There's also pleasure there. There's also something there. But what level of it? It's the lowest frequency of pleasure. It's literally like the level of nutrition that these beetles need. And that's what they use. So when you compare different states of consciousness, in a higher place, this is not even pleasurable. It's like, leave me alone. And that's what happens in our world. In a higher place of reality, and this includes even if I'm living in this world, but if I'm living in a higher reality, certain things, they're just not appealing, they're not tempting, they're not going to do anything for my system. But when I'm in a more detached place, when I'm not so connected with my soul, with my depth, now things can be very, very distracting, and they can numb my pain, and they become pleasurable. So I always have to ask myself, the pleasure that I'm now getting out of something, is it a pleasure that's feeding my deepest consciousness? Is it a pleasure that's feeding my soul? Is it a pleasure that's going to stay with me tomorrow and a week from now, a year from now? Is it a pleasure that is bringing me closer to my truest self? Or is it a pleasure that's distracting me from who I am because I don't want to deal with my anxiety or with my pain, or I'm just bored, or I'm numb, or I'm indifferent, and I just need something exciting and distracting? That's going to be the difference between something that's pleasurable, that's reflecting divine energy in a revealed way, because that's the real only source of pleasure. The only real source of pleasure is Hashem. Va'ata mechaya es kulam. So anything that's tuned into that is real pleasure and eternal pleasure. But then there's things, they're also pleasurable. They also come from Hashem. But how? They're like the excrement. They're the refuse. They're the psoilus. They still have something in them. But woe unto me if that becomes the source of my nutrition. The philosophy of Bal Peor was exactly that. They turned that into holiness. They made a philosophy of hedonism, of worshiping the most external gratifications that you can. If something feels good right here, right now, that's reality. Of course, it comes to spit a person, it comes to bite me, because it's a distraction from reality. And when I sober up, I'm going to need more and more and more and more and more. It's incessant, because essentially, I'm not tuning into my lifeline. I'm running away from my lifeline. But this was a philosophy of Bal Peor, and it's very tempting at the surface. Why? Because it removes the need for any discipline. It removes the need for any introspection, for any inner work. It just says, take what is and celebrate it. That is all there is to truth. In the real process of life, I have to always be able to distinguish. This is an external pleasure. This is a real pleasure. This is an addiction. This is a true delight. This is a distraction from me, and this is pursuing me. This is bringing me closer to my soul. This is taking me away from my soul. That's always an avoid of boirer oichel mitoich psoilus. I have to select the oichel from the psoilus, right? The nutritious part, the good parts from the excrement. I always have to make that boirer. It's called birurim. Disentangle, not get confused. The Bal Peor philosophy was, no, worship the psoilus. Take the refuse, worship it, embrace it, become addicted to it. There's absolutely no need for any distinctions, and therefore, at the surface, it's a very, very permissive, very promiscuous, in many ways fun, hedonistic life. Of course, this is something that ultimately is disastrous, because it's like a person eating what these beetles eat. When a person eats that, ultimately I'm going to get sick. And the reason I'm going to get sick is because I'm completely not in touch with who I am and what I need. We come now to the Tzemach Hashem L'Tzvi, the Tzvi of Nadvarna. And he says an amazing insight about life. And this is what he teaches. Think about this. You have a God, a fake God, but a God in their mind. And what are you doing to him? You're really giving him all the dirt. People are defecating, they're moving their bowel, or everything that people do in private places, and they send it to the cesspool, you do it on this God. And the Tzvi of Nadvarna, the student of the Maggid, says there was a very deep philosophy here. And the philosophy is, be so humble that whatever comes on your head doesn't matter. This seemed like a spiritual philosophy. The spiritual philosophy was, I am so selfless. I have no ego. So you could pour all your dirty water on me and everything else, and it's fine. I'm selfless. Essentially, it was avodah zarah. It was idolatry. I want to explain what he means here. Like everything, we could take a look at the physical, but we could see what is the message behind it. Just like in the first explanation. It's the message that was behind it. Here, there's a message. Very often, one of the things people get used to in life is they become shmatas for other people to pour their dirt onto them. It can even sometimes be justified as part of being religious, as part of being spiritual. Oh, I don't have an ego. If I don't have an ego, so fine. Let me become a doormat for others. That's why some people become people's pleasers. What's people pleasers? It's a way of pleasing people, and that's how I feel better about myself. And sometimes people can justify it, even in terms of Judaism and spirituality. Well, I'm not a stubborn. Who's this ego that I don't worship my ego? So therefore, I surrender. You want this is fine. You want this is fine. You want this is fine. Why should I have a spine and an identity that smacks with haughtiness, with gaiva, with arrogance, with chutzpah? I'm not confrontational. Sometimes it's even a very profound and helpful mechanism in life. I never confront. I just please. I'm a people's pleaser. I always surrender. I'm meek. I'm frail. Sometimes I become the tzaddik in my class, the tzaddik in my house, the most obedient boy, the most obedient girl, the most obedient young man, the most obedient young woman, the most obedient wife and husband. And everyone only has good things to say. How obedient, the level of kibbud of aim that you have, the kabbalas all that you have, the commitment that you have. You never make a peep, you never complain, you never lament, you never this. And it's amazing to grow up with such people because they almost have no needs. There's only one issue. Sometimes it comes from a very profound spiritual self, and sometimes it's a devastating disease and wound where a person really does not feel that they have any self-worth. They have absolutely no self-value in a very deep place. I'm not talking here about in an external place. In fact, there are situations where a child at a very young age or at a later age experiences so much emotional neglect or other forms of internal messages that teach this brain deep down you really have no value. There's no self. But the self needs to survive. So our coping mechanisms are very clever. Our brains are brilliant. You think our digestive system is brilliant? As brilliant as your digestive system is, our coping mechanisms are far more brilliant and clever. And when they need, they use religion and spirituality and God to justify complete emotional disability. And that is, I need value, I need worth. A person can't survive without some connection, without some validation, without somebody telling me I matter. So somehow my brain learns that if I'm never confrontational, if I become the tzaddik in my house, the tzaddik in my class, I will be the hero. I will get my validation. I will become a success story. If I'm always obedient, if I never offend anybody, I'll finally have a place in society. My self-worth is so damaged that I almost have to copy. I don't know if anybody relates to this, but probably there's one or two people who may relate to this. I almost have to copy other people, like, oh, this is how you say, this is how you speak, this is how you feel, this is the right thing to say, this is the right, because I can't trust myself. I don't know my instincts, I don't know what my body is going through, I don't know what my soul is going through. I almost have to mimic like a parrot. I watch what is appropriate behavior and then I learn what is appropriate behavior so that I don't stand out. And this comes sometimes from a feeling that I am so weird, I am so queasy, I'm so strange, I'm so creepy, I'm so valueless, whatever the term that we internalized. And sometimes it's completely not, I would say usually it's not conscious. Usually this is unconscious. And in reality what happens is I allow people to put their dirt on me. Their toxicity is now digested by me. Somebody reached out to me a few days ago. He's a very, very special person, deals with a lot of shame because of different mistakes they made in their life. And I was talking to them and I said, you know, I want to tell you something about your life. Because I happen to know his story, and so it's a pretty tragic story about things that were done to him as a kid. And I told him, other people's sickness and toxicity and poison they put into you. You digested their poison, now you internalized it as your own, and that's where your shame is coming from. It has nothing to do with you. You're actually an amazing human being. But other people's poison that they never dealt with, they literally gave it to you as such a young person, and now you really believe, you internalize it as your own, and you don't even distinguish anymore. It's literally this sickness and toxic poison that exists in other people that they have not worked on, they have not confronted for whatever reason, and now it becomes yours. And the worst thing is you're blaming yourself. And sometimes people live their entire life based on this narrative. This is the trajectory of my life. I don't even know that there's anything else. And this is the truth, that when there's no real self-love at the core, a person can't make choices in life because there's nobody to trust, there's nobody to value, there's nobody to respect. And this is something we're finding today, tremendous amount of it. Like so, the levels of anxiety, that are so profound today, and people are wondering where a lot of it is coming from. All anxiety is an alarm clock. Anxiety is an alarm clock to wake me up to something that's wrong, something that's bothering me, something that's off. Anxiety is very painful, but anxiety is not living in a vacuum. It's something that it's saying. There's a fire alarm, there's a sound alarm saying, there's a sniper, there's a shooter, there's a danger, there is a message here that you're responding to. Your body is on high alert. There's a reason your body is on high alert. Now I have to figure that out, and I have to process it somatically, and I have to be able to open myself up to my prefrontal cortex. I could be able to be in a parasympathetic state and really allow my inner energy to come out. But what's happening is I'm responding to something. And so often I go through life and rote, so unaware of all these inner forces and all these inner voices that have hijacked the core. But the truth is that the core of a person can't be abducted or tarnished. We say in the morning, Elakai neshama shenasata bi tahirihi. The soul remains pure, divine, infinite, and nobody and nothing can destroy it or eliminate it or challenge its self-worth. In fact, the fact that the soul observes all of this and knows how painful it is and protests it is because the soul has not been destroyed. If we could destroy a person at their core, chas v'shalom, there would be nobody to protest it. The reason there is anxiety, the reason there is pain is almost the soul saying something is wrong. The body is saying something is off. There's a self that is a witness to things that happen passively or actively, willingly or unwillingly. And the body and the mind and the soul, they're making a stand, they're saying a statement. Oh, now take a look. Who is the contrast to Bal Peor? Who is the greatest contrast to this type of this fake humility and this real humility? Who is the most humble human being on earth? Moshe. Torah says, "Va'ish Moshe, onav ma'od, mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama." He was the most humble person living on the earth. How did that humility express itself? He is the person who had the most dignity on earth. He's the person who also had the most self-respect on earth. He's the person who lived in the greatest state of holiness on earth. He never allowed his plug to be detached from the source of energy. Because what is humility by Moshe? What is real humility? There's real humility and there's toxic humility. Toxic humility is a humility that's coming from brokenness. It's really a coping mechanism in order to gain some fake honor and dignity, which is a facade. It's camouflaged as validation. It's a way of not standing out. It's a way of not making waves. I'm never going to tell you my opinion, and then nobody will ever disagree with me. Isn't that great? Imagine being married to a spouse who never says their opinion, so their wife could never disagree with them. Would you like that? What about marrying a spouse who never even feels what they feel, so you could never disagree with them? Right? It's amazing. What a better coping mechanism. I don't have an opinion, I don't even feel. That way I can't make trouble. I can't make any waves. I'm like the tzaddik of the generation. I'm like an angel. There's only one issue. There's a brokenness at the core of this person. There's a fear. And therefore there's also very profound anger and resentment and disassociation. So it could look like humility, but it's often toxic. I just can't show up. I don't know about me. I don't believe in me. I don't know me. I don't have my light. And by the way, people who don't suffer from this, or haven't learned a lot about it extensively, or don't deal with people that suffer, don't understand anything of this. I sometimes hear people knocking self-love. Sometimes I hear people get hung up and say how self-love is so selfish and narcissistic. Like, oh, self-love, self-love, self-love. You're busy loving yourself at the expense of the whole world. But very often it's a terrible mistake. Self-love is is the holiest love in the world. What is real self-love? It's really avas Hashem. V'haftas Hashem alekecha b'chol levavcha. Because who's the real self? The real self is a chelik eleka mimal. V'hafta l'recha kamoicha. Love the other like you love yourself. If you hate yourself, how do you know how to love the other? That's why people who have real deep self-hate, they don't know how to really love the other. Because it's just a way of escaping from my own inner shame and guilt. So yeah, there's a self-love that can be very selfish and narcissistic, but here we're talking about a humility that is not toxic, a humility that is very, very wholesome, and that's the difference between Bal Peor and Moshe Rabbeinu. Bal Peor is, do whatever you want on me. You could pour all the dirty, filthy stuff right on my head, and I'm supposed to be godly. So I don't even notice it. I don't even feel it. And I have proofs from books that great tzaddikim, they don't feel all these things because they don't have an ego. So why not? Take all the dirt, pour it right on me if I'm really connected to God. If I'm a real deity, if I'm really holy, do it even more. Do it again, do it again, do it again. It's almost like a person who never knows how to say no. You ever met such a person? We never say no. And somebody once told me, if you don't know how to say no, you also don't know how to say yes. Because it means that every yes is not a yes. It's just I'm frightened to say no. So if I'm afraid to say no, there's no boundaries. Even when I say yes, it's not a yes. Because I'm not choosing the relationship. I'm stuck in a relationship based on guilt. And it's endless. Yeah. Only one? Excellent question. Excellent question. So what's the balance? When do you tolerate someone else's dirt and poison and say, this is what I have to deal with? And when do you not tolerate it? You say, out of my system, get out, go find yourself somebody else. Excellent question. So we look to Moshe Rabbeinu because he's the quintessential humble person. Moshe Rabbeinu was far less tolerant of any spiritual and psychological poison than anybody else because he was so humble. His humility expressed itself in the fact that because he was always connected to a source, he knew exactly who he was. And therefore, his self was not an egotistical self. It was a self that was a channel for truth. It was a channel for universal consciousness. It was a channel for divine oneness. It was a channel for Hashem's love and authenticity. You know, we are all plugs. When we're plugged in, the electricity flows through us. We don't own anything in this world. There is the universal consciousness called Hashem Echad. When I'm plugged into the source, I'm a channel for that flow. If I'm not plugged in, now I have to create a counterfeit ego to compensate. So if I get up to give a class, I could be plugged in and unplugged. What does it look like when I'm unplugged? Anybody knows? Huh? Wow, what a compliment. She says she hasn't seen it yet. So I'll explain to you. When I'm unplugged, it's about me. I have to get up, I have to be good, I have to be perfect, I have to impress the people. It's a lot of pressure. And you know, nobody's ever perfect, so there's always a way you could find what was missing. If I'm plugged in, what am I? I'm just a channel for God's electricity. I'll show up with the tools I was given to the best of my ability. That's what real humility is. Humility is there's no pressure of me having to control, manipulate, exploit, be sly, be clever, because the I doesn't exist outside of being a channel for the real I. And that's where real happiness can flow, because that's the source of happiness. If I unplug myself, now I have to become my own source of electricity. So I have to become a god. So now I have to invest my poor little ego with the qualities of divinity. You know how hard that is? You take this little ego that doesn't even exist, right? And try to make a puppet show. And make believe that this little lifeless thing is God and exists and is perfect. Oy, do me a favor, it's too much pressure. I can't let go. So Moshe's humility allowed him to always remain connected to the source and a channel for the source, and then ask, what is my role right now at this moment? He never accepted any poison or toxicity. What he did do was, he always had the courage to remain fully present with love and loyalty to the people he was dedicated to. We talk about tolerance. Again, there's tolerance that is holy, and there's tolerance that is damaging. One of the promises Hashem gives Moshe in Parshat Vayda is, "V'hitzesi eschem etachas sivlois Mitzrayim." I'm going to liberate you from sivlois Mitzrayim. What does sivlois Mitzrayim mean? So the Chidush Yarim says, sivlois comes from the word savlanut. I'm going to liberate you from tolerating Egypt. I'm going to liberate you from sivlot, lisbol. You know what lisbol means? To tolerate, to have patience. Isn't patience a good thing? Depends for what. If I'm having patience for someone's growth process, if I'm having patience for somebody to come out of their closet, of their prison, of their constraints, if I'm having patience because I believe in the potentiality of somebody, and I'm tuning in to where they are, I'm trying to teach my child to ride a bike, and they're falling again, and they're falling again, and they're falling again. I get angry, why can't you ride your bike? That's just my nervous system reacted because I'm not in a space of centeredness, of balance. I'm not in a place of love. That's the patience and the tolerance that comes from bringing out the best in people and understanding that there's a process and tuning into that process. But when savlanut, when patience, when tolerance becomes, now I tolerate disease, dysfunction, lies, horrors, stupidity, in the name of holiness, then I could never be redeemed. The first prerequisite to leave Egypt is that I don't tolerate it anymore. Right? When a community, as long as a community tolerates child abuse, domestic abuse, abuse of women, abuse of men, abuse of children, abuse of agunas, abuse of the vulnerable, abuse of people who can't fend to themselves. If a community tolerates this in the name, because we have savlanut, it's like what Israel did for 50 years, tolerating terrorism. It's the greatest mistakes in history. The greatest mistakes in history are made when we tolerate evil, when we tolerate toxicity. When you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you'll be able to leave Egypt. If you're talking about tolerance to a struggle, someone is struggling, tolerance to the fact that people make mistakes and they need to grow and they need to learn their lessons, and you want to be there for them to be able to help their light shine, that's a tolerance that comes from a very deep place of love and attachment. So that's what you have to ask yourself. Am I tolerating this from a place of wholeness or from a place of brokenness? If I'm in a place of guilt and shame, it's going to create resentment. It's like, am I saying yes to you because I want to say yes? Or am I saying yes because I'm simply afraid of letting you down and saying no, and I don't have boundaries? You know, I remember I once had to take a flight to South Africa or somewhere else, a far country. And I was on the way going to the airport, and somebody came to talk to me. This is many, many years ago. I've learned my lesson. And it was a very difficult story and a vulnerable story, and they were very open. They were open to me. And there was a voice in me saying, you have to go to the airport. Like, tell them we'll make a time. I'm coming back in a week or whatever it is. We'll talk. But I didn't. I thought I still have time. But really what was happening is I didn't have the strength. I didn't have the strength just to tell them no, Maybe I liked the attention. Maybe there were other psychological reasons. You have to talk to my therapist exactly the underlying reasons. But I just did, and of course I came to the airport. I missed the flight. The next flight, I don't think they had the next day, so it was like 2 days later. And this was a trip with a bunch of lectures. So this whole lecture tour was really upended because I couldn't say no. So I was trying to be this tzaddik, say yeah, But really, thousands of people, were coming for lectures. There was Shabbatons, there was programming. It was a disaster. And I was to blame. I was to blame because in the name of being kind, it looked like kind, but it wasn't really being kind. It was not tuning in and not showing up to my responsibility at that moment, which could be in a very respectful way. I'm sorry, this is not the right time. I mean, it's not like it wasn't an issue of pikuach nefesh. It was issues about his life that he needed help with. It could have waited. So the same is true, in so many other areas in life. When I'm tolerating, when I'm just being subservient, nichna, and being mavater, it's a beautiful mid. It's called midas haviter, compromise. No marriage can be successful without compromise. Impossible. Who could live in a relationship without compromise? You have to hear what the other person needs. You have to know your own needs. But there's a difference between compromise that's coming from a place of trust and attachment and connection, and compromise that's coming from a place of brokenness and really abuse. And that's where you also have to know what I can't compromise on. I cannot compromise if you'll ask me in the name of friendship, I don't want you to breathe for an hour. It's a beautiful friendship, I know. It's just not going to work. You're going to have a dead spouse. That's what you want? Fine. That's what some people want. They want a dead spouse. Don't breathe for an hour. I tell them, I never want you to go out with friends. I never want you to go out with friends. Compromise. Why should you compromise? You're not allowed to have a friend when you're married? There's nothing that you get from a girlfriend that you can't get from a man? There's different relationships. I don't want you talking to your sister ever again. What? That's not compromise. That's not tolerance. There's something off here. What else what's the next thing I should do? I should stop eating. I should stop drinking. I should stop sleeping. I should stop breathing. I'm not talking about if the husband is trying to help his wife because there's a toxic connection and he's trying to help her get out of that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about two sisters who are close to each other and appreciate each other and enjoy each other, but he wants a little more attention or whatever it is. It takes a lot of courage, and that's the difference between Moshe's humility and Bal Peor. Bal Peor is, come, as they say in Yiddish, do whatever you want on me. I'm godly. I don't feel anything. It's a beautiful, I don't have an ego. If I don't have an ego, so I could be the toilet bowl. But there's something off about that. What do you mean toilet bowl? You're a toilet bowl? Forgive me. Forgive my expressions. What do you mean? You're a channel for God. These words, who am I and what do I think of myself and why am I making a big deal? If I'm making a big deal of my ego, then I need help. But if I'm making a big deal of the fact that at every moment I'm plugged into the source, and there's love and light and truth that God wants to shine through me right now, I need to take that seriously. That's not arrogant. On the contrary, it's the greatest humility. It's the humility that I'm a servant. I'm a channel. And if I need to pull out my plug in order to satisfy somebody who's in a dysfunctional place, I won't even be able to be here for you. It's very important also with parents and children. Parents give so much to their children, but they have to be plugged in. If a parent doesn't nurture their own spiritual and emotional needs, they can't be there for the children the way their children need them to be. Because you have to be a person. Right? There's that famous story in, that old story during the war. There was a mother who finally got food for herself and her children after days of starvation, and she herself hasn't eaten a thing because whatever she had, she gave to her kids. So she locked herself up in the room, take 5 minutes, and she's eating. And the kids are banging, where are you? We need you, what are you doing? She said, what I'm doing is, I'm giving you a mother. I'm giving you a mother. Somebody says, I'm a mother. I don't have to eat. I don't have to sleep. I don't have to exercise, which is a Yiddish mama. I don't need anything. I told you once after a lecture, a woman came over to me and she said, all my children are miserable. How can I make them happy? Right? Straight out. Straight out. She was an Israeli, so it was like, Americans, it takes 2 hours. British, it takes whatever. But she was an Israeli, so miyad. My kids are miserable. How do I make them happy? So I said, I don't think you could make your kids happy. I think you could make yourself happy. And you will radiate that. And your kids will say, wow, it's nice to be around this woman. People like to be around happy people. Everybody likes that. So she looks at me. She says, me? Oh, I gave up on myself. I've been miserable for 30 years. So I told her, I don't know how to say this nicely, but that's what you're going to teach your children. You're going to teach your children to worry about their kids being happy. And then they will teach their children that they need to think about their kids being happy. And then somebody is going to ask the question, who is this all for? Where does the buck stop? Which generation is allowed to be happy? Which generation is allowed to be happy? I'm not allowed to be happy. My kids need to be happy. My kids are not allowed to be their kids. When are you allowed to be happy? Redemptive consciousness, Geula, means that ability to be able to embrace with glory and respect and honor that you are a humble channel for God, and therefore the I is nothing, but the I is everything. In Hasidus it's called Bittul Atzmi, which breeds Toikef Atzmi. Bittul Atzmi means complete humility. I'm a complete channel, but that creates the deepest form of confidence and strength. It's not confrontational confidence where I'm not going to disagree with people in order to fight. These are people who don't have defense mechanisms. Moshe Rabbeinu you could talk to. Kairach attacked him and said, you made up this whole thing, you think you're holier than everybody else. The first thing he did is he fell on his face before he said a word. Vayishma Moshe vayipol al panav. He didn't punch Kairach in the nose. First thing is he fell down on his face. He had to be introspective. Am I going to respond from a place of arrogance or am I going to respond from a place of humility? So now, we understand Bal Peor and Moshe are literally two contrasts. Bal Peor looks very holy. I never say no. I'm a tzaddik. I'm subservient. I don't even have a self. Make me as dirty as you want. Give me all your poison. It's fine. I don't exist. I'm batal u'mavutal. But woe to the anger that's going to come out from this person's unconscious self. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of pain. It's just my coping mechanism became this. And it's a very powerful coping mechanism because it works in our society. Everybody could look at me and say, you'll never find such a Bal Chesed in the world. You'll never find such a holy person in the world. But really, this person shut down. This person really shut down. It's very sad. It's hard to distinguish. Moshe didn't shut down in his humility. Moshe was more humble than everybody else. But he was more powerful than everybody else because he was more humble. He's the one who stood up to Parai. He didn't say, I'm a humble guy. Parai is this big guy and he's my step-grandfather too. I should have a little respect. People don't realize Parai was Moshe's step-zayda. A little respect. Moshe says, respect for what? Respect for somebody throwing in children to a river? That's what humility means? That I tolerate somebody throwing in children to a river? If that's what humility is, woe unto humility. If that's what tolerance means, there's no respect for truth. Yeah, look what happened by the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. What happened? The Secret Service were told, right? There's videos today. There's a guy on the roof with a gun. You would think this is what you trained for 50 years, shaita. No, we'll wait till he kills. So he killed. We'll wait till he shoots.
Women were protecting him, not the men.
What happens when you live in an environment where truth doesn't matter anymore? So there's no parameters, there's no boundaries. Day is night, night is day. Sheker is emes, emes is sheker. The Baal Shem Tov once said, we say in Eshes Chal, sheker hachein v'hevel hayofi. Literally it means, external grace is false and external beauty is vain. So the Baal Shem Tov said there's going to come a time in history where sheker is going to be called chein and hevel is going to be called yofi. Lies are going to be called graceful and vanity is going to be called beautiful. Sheker becomes chein, hevel becomes yofi. And the reason is because the genesis, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem, the genesis of wisdom is the fear of God. What does that mean? If there's no respect for God, it means there's no respect for truth. Truth means there's something called truth. You don't want to call it God, don't call it God, call it universal truth. But there's a higher truth that I don't decide based on my moods. But the moment you get rid of that, even biology is not dedicated to truth anymore. Science, physics, facts don't mean anything. Facts don't mean anything. Somebody told me yesterday that Trump set this all up. He said it's obvious that Trump set this up in order to win the elections. It's an intelligent person. An intelligent person probably has a PhD too. That's why I'm not getting my PhD. I don't know if he has a PhD. I'm just what's my point? My point is the moment there's no Yiras Hashem. This has no, by the way, with Republican or Democrat, right wing or left wing, nothing to do with it. This has to do the moment there's no Yiras Hashem, there's no Chachma. You become cuckoo, stupid. Huh? What do you say? You agree with me? This is true. I think it's true. I mean, that's how I see it. So the same is true when you talk about humility. Humility is amazing. As what? As a channel for truth. But if my humility becomes a cover-up for lies, and if my humility is a cover-up because I'm broken, which is the greatest lie in the world, that you're broken and valueless and insignificant and full of shame and full of dirt. You see, what's the real truth of Bal Peor is this. If the inner, you'll forgive me for my language, if the excrement is inside of me, I don't get affected if you pour a little more on me because it has where to go, because it's already inside of me. If I feel my purity, then I say, no, this doesn't belong to me. You all know you're dressed up for a chassan or another occasion, Shabbos, Yom Tov, if I'm wearing a beautiful suit or whatever it is, and somebody comes, with orange juice or chocolate mousse ice cream to pour it on me, I'm like, but if I'm in the mud, I went on a hike and it's pouring rain and I fell into a ditch and I'm already muddy, now you pour some more mud, bring it on. You need a carbon, I'll be the carbon. It's true psychologically, subconsciously, even more than consciously. If that dirt sits in me because it's already inside of me, bring it on. I'm comfortable with the feeling. One of the most painful things I heard from somebody, he lives in Brooklyn. It's hard for me to say this. The reason I say these things is, even though somebody always gets upset for me saying it, is because there's somebody who hears it and it saves their life. That's why I say it. And I'm not exaggerating. Somebody told me they were molested by 4 people. By a brother, and by the Gabbai in Shul, and by a family friend, and by another relative, an uncle. 4 people over 6-7 years. This guy is a diamond of a person. I know him well. A diamond of a person, I'm telling you. But internally, a broken man. And he told me, so I turned to him once, and he did a lot of work. And I said, what did this do to your inner template? And he told me, he said, Rabbi Jacobson, what it did was I came to belief at the core that for me to serve a purpose in this world, I need to become make myself available for anyone who needs to do these things. Anyone who needs to fulfill their horrific desires, I need to make myself available, and that's how I will fulfill my purpose in the world. He says, that's my template. That's how I will become a good person. That's how I will have value. That's what he was taught about, his value. So you understand how deep this is. So now when dirt is poured onto this person, oh, it belongs here. How do I teach a child to have that inner sensitivity? You're pure. This is poison. It doesn't belong to you. This is alien. Tell your mother. Tell your father. This doesn't belong to you. And to tell that to myself. This does not belong to me. You're not filthy. Neshama shenasata bi tahiri. This poison, put it somewhere else. That's the difference between Bal Peor and Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe's humility was a divine humility. So humility that glorifies the power of the holiness in every person. The Bal Peor is the exact opposite. They both can use the words humility, but they mean totally opposite things. And we all know psychologically, it's a completely different frequency. So now, to conclude, let's see the last source. This is a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, Keser Shem Tov Siman Kuf Mem He. And he articulates this in the most clear way. And he says as follows. Mea Baal Shem Tov. Roiv, second to the last paragraph. Roiv an vasnusoy shala adam goyim shnisrachik ma'avodas Hashem yizbarach. Sometimes the excessive humility of a person distances him from Hashem. Really? Because of his sense of humbleness, he doesn't believe that he creates anything in this world. He doesn't believe that his prayer, his Torah brings a flow into the world. He doesn't realize that he's plugged in. He's a channel of electricity. You're a channel. You bring shefa. Shefa means flow, hashpa. All the angels, which means all the spiritual energies, are fed from your Torah, from your prayer, from your being, from your life. If a person would really believe this integrated, person would serve God with simcha, with ecstasy, with awe. He would be cautious and respect every word that comes out of his mouth and every tnuah, every motion. The person would have this self-respect. A word is a word. You're not a nobody. You're not a shtick garnished. You're not a piece of garbage. You're not dung. V'gam losis level mashamar shloim alav hashalom tishkevun bein svatayim. Shakadosh Baruch Hu shoymed v'shoymer v'shoyked al sifsei ha'adam l'noishkak sho oimra b'teiro tefillah b'dechilu rechimu. So pasuk in Tehillim, if God lay between the lips, so Baal Shem Tov says, Hashem stands near my lips waiting to kiss the beautiful words that come out of my mouth. You know how a mother watches her baby say the first word or turn over the first time. You remember? And you have a diary and you write it down, yeah? January 16th at 1 o'clock, yeah? Sarala turned over, you remember? Once you hit, yeah, I think once they hit 6 or 7, those diaries are gone, yeah? Yeah. Right? So God is standing by the mouth. Wow, what a word. He's standing there to kiss the words that come out of a person's mouth. The Torah, the Tefillah, when it's done with awe and love. Who then will not be overtaken with awe and reverence and respect that the infinite God actually cares about the words that are coming from a physical, mortal, small human being. Baal Shem Tov now says one of the most incredible insights. We're coming now soon to the 3 weeks. The Gemara says in Maseches Gittin, the very famous story, that Reb Zcharia ben Afkilas did something, and it caused the destruction. What happened? Kamtza, you remember the story of Kamtza? He went to the Roman emperor. He said the Jews rebelled against you. He gave him a calf to offer in the Beis HaMikdash, and this man made a blemish in the eye so that the sages would not be able to sacrifice it. They said, we have to sacrifice it because it's pikuach nefesh. The Roman emperor sent it. Reb Chaim ben Afkilah said, you're not allowed to. Why? Because people will think you're allowed to sacrifice a blemished animals. They said, so we have to kill this man because he's a musser. He's going back to Rome. He said, you're not allowed to, because they're going to say if somebody blemishes an animal, you kill them. So they left him alive. They didn't sacrifice the animal in the Beis HaMikdash, and he went back to Rome. And he said the Jews rebelled. They wouldn't even offer your offering. So the Gemara says the humility anvasnusay of Reb Chaim ben Afkilah destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. So Baal Shem Tov says, what does this mean? The humility of Reb Chaim ben Afkilah destroys the Beis HaMikdash. And he says humility can destroy a Beis HaMikdash. That's the humility of Bal Peor. Anvasnusay. Why? What's a Beis HaMikdash? Beis HaMikdash is the place where the Shekhinah dwells. Think about the inner Beis HaMikdash. My humility can destroy my Beis HaMikdash. I look at my body and I say, you're not a Beis HaMikdash, you're a piece of filth, garbage. Stuff yourself with some other stuff. I don't look at myself as a Beis HaMikdash. The Shekhinah wants to dwell in me and through me, and I'm a channel. That's healthy humility. This is humility that creates a Churban Beis HaMikdash. So what rebuilds the Beis HaMikdash? The opposite of this humility. What's the antithesis of this humility? So Baal Shem Tov says, a person ought to internalize the truth. You are a ladder etched on the ground, and the top of the ladder reaches heaven. That's a person. I'm a ladder. Sometimes you feel very earthy. You know why? Because your ladder is on the ground. Sometimes you feel closer to heaven because the ladder reaches heaven. Sometimes I don't know where I am. Am I in heaven? Am I in purgatory? Because you're a ladder. You're everywhere. We take our mood so seriously and we say, now I'm in purgatory, now I'm in heaven, I'm a sugar, I'm a split personality, I'm dirty, I'm clean. You're a ladder. You are the interlacing link between heaven and earth. That's a person. And that's why I can go to the highest places, and I can go to the lowest places. But that's why I could connect the highest places to the lowest places. All the motions of a person, the involvements of a person, the words, even the walking of a person, it has an impact. It has an impact on the world. If a person thinks, who do you think I am? I'm just a depressed loser. Leave me alone. What I do doesn't make a difference. What I say doesn't make a difference. Just pass the Danish, or whatever my Danish looks like. This doesn't bring out the best in people. This makes people frivolous. Then nothing matters. But it's not true. A person in his or her holy acts is completely one with God. My empathy here, my empathy on myself or on others here creates an explosion of empathy in all the worlds. It says in Pirkei Avos, know what is above you. Literally it means, this is the ethics of the Fathers, chapter 2. Know what is above you. The Baal Shem Tov says, Da mala maila mimach. Whatever happens above comes from you. You don't want to know what's happening lamaila, above? Just look at yourself. Because since you're the ladder that connects heaven and earth, you're the rope that connects the highest to the lowest. So he says, look into your own heart. Whatever midah, what I am radiating right now, that is what's happening. Kivayachal by Hashem. Da, mala, maila, mimoch, it comes from you. This is not to impose guilt and shame on a person. This is for a person to understand that victimhood is simply not the real narrative of the human being. The story of a human being is infinite largeness. I have to work through all of my parts. So now we come back in conclusion. Now we can appreciate what happens there. The Jewish people become addicted to Bal Peor. There's something in Bal Peor that is very enticing. 4 times in Dvarim, 5 times in Bamidbar. The most popular Avodah Zarah in Torah. Moshe is buried mul Bal Peor. He speaks in front of the Bal Peor. Why? Because Bal Peor represents one of the most powerful forces that Judaism came to the world to constantly teach us to be cautious against. Number one, a form of religiosity, spirituality, humility that is poisonous, that is toxic, that tolerates abuse and lies and stupidity and pettiness. A form of brokenness which breeds the sense of subservience, where a person does not respect not their boundaries, not their dignity, not their honor, not their soul, not their body. It allows my humility to destroy my Beis HaMikdash. Moshe is the one who gets it most. He's buried mul Beis Peor because he is the contrast to that. Moshe is the ultimate humility, but it's humility rooted in divine infinity. It's humility rooted in real kindness. It's humility rooted in the person's true power as an Eved Hashem. That's what kindness is. That's what love is. Not love coming out of guilt because I'm afraid to say no. It's love coming out of my openness. There's real attachment here. It's not I say yes and I resent you for the next 3 weeks because you forced me to say yes. And then there is the Baal HaTanya's idea, and it's really one idea. Because when I don't know who I am, then I look at this psilus, I look at this refuse, and this is what I come to worship. These types of pleasures are what I come to worship. The reason I'm going to all these distractive pleasures is because I simply don't know who I am. I'm full of shame. I'm full of inner shame, so therefore this is what I allow myself to get. This is what I think I deserve. This is the only thing I think can help me numb my pain. So the two interpretations are really so deeply connected. So when Moshe is speaking to the Jewish people, he's speaking to them mul Beis Peor, by the Beis Peor, because he says this is the contrast. In life, at every moment, either I'm going to be seeking distraction or seeking attachment. Seeking authenticity or running away to inauthenticity. Numbing my pain or healing my pain by connecting to something real. That's a choice. In every relationship, in every conversation, every day, I make that choice. Bal Peor or Moshe Rabbeinu. Of course his conversation is in front of Bal Peor. There's going to be pleasures in excrement. There is. Everybody knows it. Somehow in my mind, a cheesecake is still more delicious than kale. I wish I can get over it. If the cheesecake would speak, it would say the truth. Poison. Kale would say, I'm good. But the cheesecake somehow has this whole presentation. It's a choice I need to make every day between what looks good and attractive, but it's going to be numbing, it's going to disassociate me, it's going to disconnect me, or that which will bring me to truer nutrition, physically, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. It all comes from how I see my internal self. So the two interpretations of the Baal HaTanya and Reb Tzvi of Nadvon and Tzemach Shem Letzvi are really the same interpretation. What part of yourself do you see? And therefore, what part of the world do you embrace? And that's why Yeshua says we still haven't cleansed ourselves from it, because the challenge of Bal Peor is really the challenge of life. At every moment to be able to choose between the life force and everything in the world and the psilus, the refuse, that ultimately doesn't have any real substance and real identity. And its whole purpose is really just to stimulate a deeper relationship. Have a wonderful week. Next week there's a class, Be'ezer Hashem, Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. It's a fast day. Yehafech l'simcha, yeah. I don't know, is that fine or we shouldn't have it? Huh? We should have it? Okay. Everybody have a beautiful week. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Did I answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to give a special mazel tov to Mrs. Newhouse on the birth of a granddaughter. Mazel tov. You have a lot of nachas, larichas yamim v'shanim tovos. Sarah Esther. Ba-da-dum-bum.